want to be cinematographer for a little bit? Okay. What joins the Frankfurt School with two earlier presentations by Professor John Leedy-Martin? Last week was about Marx. This week is about, we're getting to, and so to Simmel. Where do we get from this to the Frankfurt School? If we look at Walter Benjamin, who's going to be the first reading within the Frankfurt School, what was the linkage of Walter Benjamin to Marx and to the Frankfurt School and to the other? So we're trying to get that is one thing which John, Professor Martin, today was a wonderful presentation, I would say, stressing the subtlety, the nuances, the complications, the way the shell and the jelly inside. Put these illustrated very well the subtleties that we can see in Benjamin. Benjamin has many different things, whereas some of the others, I would say, especially Horkheimer was the director of the Institute in Frankfurt, and we have a section.
I just Googled him, Benjamin. He was a member of the Institute for Social Research, the core research center of the Frankfurt School.
Yeah, okay, why don't you read a little bit right there.
So Walter Benjamin was a key figure associated with the early Frankfurt School, a group of intellectuals known for their critical theory, and his work, particularly his focus on aesthetics, culture, and technology, significantly influenced the school's development. He was a member of the Institute for Social Research, the core research center of the school, and his work was closely tied to the school's critical approach to society and culture. His work explored the themes that resonated with the Frankfurt School's interests, including aesthetics and technology, culture and society, history and memory.
Stop. Let's try to get to his PhD presentation. And his PhD, I think if we go down to...
I can Google what it was.
Yeah, so no, stay there. So you're still in Adorno?
No.
In Horkheimer's.
No, I'm in Walter Benjamin.
Okay.
Oh, I'm in.
No, it's fine.
I'm also in Adorno. We're in all the places.
Okay, now I won't be able to do this just from memory because I printed some of this and I didn't bring the printed part. Uh-huh. So let's just read. Can you see a little bit of it? Which one have you got now?
This one's the dialectical method that had.
No, we don't want.
Oh no.
We want these names of people.
Dialectic of enlightenment. Adorno and Horkheimer.
Okay. Well, that's one bottom line. Let's go ahead with that. Is that title is on our syllabus? Who is listed as the editors of the authors of the book? Adorno and Horkheimer in their essay. Then what does it say here?
About dialectic of enlightenment, or about them in general?
That's Benjamin right now.
There we go. Just read a little bit of that.
Sure.
I can't read it.
Adorno and Horkheimer's Dialectic of Enlightenment, written during the Institute's exile in America, was published in 1944. While retaining many Marxist insights, this work shifted emphasis from a critique of the material forces of production to a critique of the social and ideological forces brought by early capitalism. The Dialectic of Enlightenment uses the Odyssey as a paradigm for their analysis of bourgeoisie consciousness. In this work, Adorno and Horkheimer introduce many themes that central to subsequent social thought. There's a typo. Their exposition of the domination of nature as a central characteristic of instrumental rationality and its application within the capitalism of the post-Enlightenment era was made long before ecology and environmentalism became popular concerns. They claim that instrumental rationality is the new means of cultural reproduction within the mechanical age. It is a fusion of domination and technological rationality that brings all of external and internal nature under the power of the human subject. In the process, the subject gets swallowed up, and no social force analogous to the proletariat can be identified that can enable the subject to emancipate itself.
Okay. There is a critical last line there. There's no proletariat. Is this Marx? It's critical theory. Is it how can you have, there's no class consciousness and classes fighting each other at all? How can you do Marx without that? Okay. These are complicated. So there's another quote if we had it I'm trying to find the quote. Benjamin wrote ideally a thesis. You do two theses in Germany. The big one is called the Habilitation, and he was going to present this to the University of Frankfurt, chaired by Horkheimer. Adorno was there as well, and some of the others. And is there
I just looked up his PhD, the thesis on the philosophy of history.
Basically, Horkheimer and Adorno counseled him, don't try to submit it. You will destroy your career. This is Habilitation is maybe two or three times as big as a PhD in America. It's mid-career, often write it in your 40s, not at 26. So these are remarkably subtle Wikipedia entries. They had some German folks who rewrote these things, who had a lot of these things with the subtlety which you heard today. And I was delighted to see, because often we don't get this in Wikipedia. We tend to give you, Durkheim says this, Adorno says that, whereas this gives you some of the wonderful subtlety. You also heard Schopenhauer and Niezsche. You didn't hear much elaborated, but we'll get a little bit, and maybe continuing on. One way to crudely simplify is to say Benjamin was trying things out, but one was Marx for sure, and he went and he had a background that was philosophy, it was literature, it was all kinds of things. But to explore further Marx, he went to Moscow, 1917. This is only a few years after 1917. This is really hot stuff in the whole world. So going to Moscow soon after 1917, and so the main thing. So the main takeaway. I mean, I read some of the book. The main takeaway was, it's cold. It's so cold. Oh my God, it's so cold. There's nothing else I can think about. Okay, so then he did a book on Berlin. Berlin, you had in a sense you had today. Okay, lots of things and subtle. Okay, then he heard about Paris. So he went to Paris and he spent the last, middle of his life in Paris. And he worked on the book and he never finished it. It was too complicated. But the book, there are 3 volumes published, and so his work never, they were not pulled together, they were mainly essays. They were pulled together 20, 30 years, 40 years later, published by Harvard University Press. And the Arcade Project really was a major work, but it was diffuse and subtle and so forth. So he then tried to summarize it twice, and he gave you 2 prefaces, and those are what are on a reading list. Those short 10, 15 page, and he did 2 versions of this. One was in the early 30s, the others in 1939 or 1940. They're both published there together. And if you read one little thing in it, which is I think it's the end of the whole thing, but read about his model. Who was his main informant? His data. What was the most? There are lots of huge numbers of things, but the most important person whose mind was inside, who he wanted to disentangle, was Baudelaire. And why did he choose Baudelaire? In part because he was very subtle, but also because he was the most popular writer in France at the late and part of the 19th century, and especially Paris. And so to understand the mind of Paris and to understand the city of Paris, he went into the mind of Baudelaire and to the poetry of Baudelaire, as well as the essays of Baudelaire, and then to try to put these together that would make some sense. But he then said, what were some of the things that really drove his emotions? And one of them, and this was the themes which you get with Zimmel you have here. Read what he says about Wagner, and we'll come back in a little bit on Wagner. Well, actually, let me even go from there. I've given you, in a sense, I'm skipping the details about the Frankfurt School and come back to that. But let's start with the connection between these different traditions: Marx, Moscow, Berlin, Frankfurt, Paris. And where do these things work? And let me try to give you an interesting way of answering that. And let me see if we can put this to work. Let's get less of volume, please. Cinematographer here. This is Wotan, King of the Gods. That's the first of 4 operas. This is the second beginning now. These are dead bodies, fought and destroyed in battle. They will be transported by the Valkyries. And the Valkyries, their horses fly. Brunhilde is the leader of the Valkyries. This theme is the most famous in the ring. It's the theme of the Valkyries. This is the third opera, another child of the King of the Gods, raised by nature, not by society. Fourth, the twilight of the gods. Brunhilde, the leader of the Valkyries. Daniel Barenboim, Argentine, Jewish, career in Chicago, Paris, performed a lot, directed in Berlin, and now he has a son who directs an orchestra in Israel with Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs performing together in the same orchestra. When Daniel Barenboim, the father, was invited to come back and perform at a very celebrated occasion, they said, "I'd like to perform Wagner because you've never permitted Wagner to be performed in Israel, but this is critically important music in the history of the world, and it's part of Israel. It's part of our history." And they said, "No, never in Israel." So he was there with the crowd there, and what did he do? They played Wagner. Okay, this generated a huge scandal. There's a whole book about it in Wagner within Israel. And so Barenboim also presented with a French top theater expert, and together they created this presentation of Wagner in Bayreuth, which is the little town outside Munich, created by the king, where he was presenting Wagnerian work. Okay, if that's a very short summary of the Wagner part, but then let's go back to how do we make sense of this, and how can we as social scientists learn from Wagner and from the others, and the intervening. Levi Strauss is going to be the link. But, whoops.
I live stream on Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, and more. This week alone, I've won 18 out of 20 trades.
Okay, here we go.
Is by far the largest. A consecutive performance of its 4 separate parts would last for some 50
Deryck
hours.
Cooke is a leading
To confer
Wagnerian
unity on
in
this
England.
vast scheme, Wagner built his score out of a number of recurrent themes, each one associated with some element in the drama and developed in conjunction with that element throughout the work. These themes, or leading motives as they've come to be called, are not mere identification tags, nor is the score a simple patchwork made up by introducing each motive at the appropriate point in the stage action. Wagner's own description of his themes was melodic moments of feeling, and writing about his intentions beforehand, he said, "These melodic moments will be made by the orchestra into a kind of emotional guide throughout the labyrinthine structure of the drama." Wagner's motives have, in reality, a fundamentally psychological significance, and his score is a continuous symphonic development of them, reflecting the continuous psychological development of the stage action. In consequence, a comprehensive analysis of the ring would be an enormous task. It would involve clarifying the psychological implications of all the motives and tracing their changing significance throughout the whole of their long and complex development. Nevertheless, understanding and enjoyment of the work can be greatly helped by simply establishing the identity of all the really important motives and indicating what immediate dramatic symbols they stand for, which is all that this introduction is intended to do. The motives are associated with 4 different types of dramatic symbol: characters, objects, events, and emotions. An example of a motive representing a character is the stern fanfare which introduces Hunding in Act 1 of Die Valkyries. An example of a motive representing an object is the genial theme associated with Freya's golden apples. This is introduced in Scene 2 of Das Rheingold. It's sung by Fafner as he explains the value of the apples to Fasold. An example of a motive representing an event is the brief agitated figure on the woodwind, which follows Alberic's threat of violence against the Rhine maidens in Scene 1 of Rheingold. An example of a motive representing an emotion is the furious repeated figure on the orchestra, which portrays Siegfried's anger during Act 1 of Siegfried. These examples are only 4 of the almost innumerable motives in the ring. But at the heart of this diversity, there's a simple unity. Practically all the motives arise from a few basic motives. Each of these basic motives represents one of the central symbols of the drama, and it generates a number of other motives by a process of transformation to represent various aspects of the central symbol concerned. And so we can thread our way through the jungle of motives in the ring by grouping them into their different families. We can start from each basic motive in turn and trace the family of motives it generates throughout the ring before continuing with the next basic motive.
Wow, look at this.
Whoops.
94% of people believe company culture is important to an organization's success.
Culture.
No, something. Back up to this. Okay, maybe I should give up, but we don't want to waste time on that. But we've gotten the core ideas from Deryck Cooke, and what I'm giving you is 3 minutes, 5 minutes worth he's written books and books, and even this is an excerpt. What I have is from both sides, vinyl, both 33 1/3 records. I mean, so it's a long oral, full thing you can purchase from Amazon if you want the detail. So you have snippets like this on for free on YouTube. Okay, if we end with that and go back to Frankfurt, Adorno, etc. Two names you mentioned 2 or 3 times were Schopenhauer and Niezsche. When Wagner was trying to think about what he would say and how he would build on these people around him, he had two of the most important who had impact on him, and they were Schopenhauer and Niezsche. And when Wagner wrote sections of it, he showed it to them, and Schopenhauer wrote, no, why don't you change this, change the work. That is, they were all integrally part of the romantic nationalism, the German romanticism, which emerged together. That is, you can even more generally term it here at the University of Chicago. There's a book and a series of lectures on romanticism, and romanticism was really these people at the core. In France, you had Stendhal, who was a critical writer, and others, Berlioz and so forth. And then at the end of the 19th century, Bergson, as if you will, was the main opponent of Durkheim. And they, as John mentioned, Durkheim was in the Sorbonne, the official university of Paris, and it structured and linked through the administration of the strong state to all of the universities across France. And then people who had to pass exams could then be promoted in ways that followed that kind of structure. Across the street was the Collège de France, and this is where Bergson was. And across that street were they had street fights all the time, and so they would show up with little pieces of wood. They would beat each other, and the police would come occasionally. Police would usually not get involved, but you had people following Durkheim and Bergson, and these kinds of things were going on in other street fights, and similar things went on through a lot of the 19th century. It was not just street fights; these connected with who was the president of the country. And so what's going on with Putin and Ukraine was 19th century Paris, and etc. So I could end there, but I made one link very briefly. Take a look at those two versions of Wagner and Wagner is mentioned in Berlioz. Baudelaire, who's near the end, is mentioned in 1939, which I think is what we have here. And if you look back and compare it to I think it's 1935, he says very different things in those two versions about Wagner. In 1939, he was known as being a celebrated hero of Hitler and of some of the German staff. By contrast, the earlier Wagner wanted desperately to be in the most important opera in Europe, which was in Paris. Who was the director of the Paris Opera, 1880, 1890, and so forth? Rossini. Rossini was the most important Italian opera writer and beloved in Italy, but he took that job. He stopped writing opera, and he etc. Wagner said, is there any way you could perform some of the things that I've done? And so we'll see. But he never did. So later on, when Rossini moved out, Wagner then, however, changed his music. The music he wrote in the last third or so of his life was drastically different from what you heard in The Ring. It was much more romantic, abstract, smooth, and the most extreme version, I have here, but I won't try to dig it out. But you can easily, if you want, Tristan and Isolde. Just listen to 5 minutes of the overture to Tristan. It's totally different from the kinds of things that you heard in The Ring. The French, the Parisians love the Tristan music. And Baudelaire became the editor of Études Wagneriennes, Wagner studies. So the leading intellectual in Paris started editing a journal about Wagner to try to get people to talk about him. Just as Niezsche was so impressed by hearing these kinds of musical presentations and then seeing these kinds of things he was thinking about, writing about together, with the kinds of things that John Levy Martin is writing. These are what they were talking with each other and saying, now you're not capturing it in the character in the way that you should. The sound isn't quite right, and so forth. So these interpenetrations of the style of music, the leitmotif, the idea, then led to, and I'll just mention one word is Gesamtkunstwerk, the holistic Gesamtkunst is art, Werk is work. So it's a holistic artwork, and so that's the simple one long German word. But what he said in 5 volumes, 4 or 5 volumes, these are these are published later. These are essays. He wrote these, and there's a section I'd read earlier. There's a University of Chicago book called "The Visit of Wagner to Rossini," and it's part of Wagner, Rossini, and Paris, basically. And Niezsche was presented earlier on as supporting and making good words about Wagner, whereas many secondary sources will say that Niezsche disagreed and they broke with each other. It was black and white. The Alex Ross book, which is, I mentioned last time briefly, is much more subtle. And it has long sections in discussing the issues that Niezsche and Schopenhauer and Wagner were all arguing about. And as they brought in these new themes, then each of them would shift, and they wouldn't just write the music, they wrote essays as well. So Wagner was not a philosopher in the sense of being a creative new academic textual philosopher, but he was doing what he was trying to do here was, as you can see, integrated with German Romanticism. All right, now just to have one more deep contrast. Near the end of somewhere on our syllabus, there's a guy named Wimmer, W-I-M-M-E-R. It's published in, so John, as you know, is the editor of the American Journal of Sociology. He's the.
We don't do this. There's no this.
Okay. In his journal is, I don't know if you were involved with the AGS when the paper was reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wait, I don't know if you want to. I'll hesitate if you want to say anything about it.
No, but it's work on the spread of nationalism. This amazing finding that cultural nationalism is an international phenomenon that spreads along interpersonal networks. Not the way. But Terry, you haven't gotten to the flaneur. So you don't have your notes, but I actually have your notes from last time. And I think you need to explain what is one of the critical things about Benjamin here for culture. is this idea of the flaneur.
For sure. That's the one-word summary, which you've now gotten from the editor's voice. We want a one-word summary, okay? And that's it. But I'm just moving in to say these things are not just 19th century history. These are right now being discussed by the editor of the American Journal, and this was published, in the last few months, okay? And so, and the author, Wimmer, is a German Swiss, so he's not really German. The Swiss fought often against the Germans, especially the German-speaking, etc. Okay, so I'm simply making the point, look at our syllabus, listen to some of these things, look for ways to put them together, and these have been, okay. Well, let's get to the one-word summary. The big point of all of this, is Benjamin's background, Moscow, Paris. How could Paris succeed? This is now Marx. How could Paris succeed economically, as most other cities bought factories? Factories. This was. Hey, at least Engels would talk about the scientific laws of history. Inevitably, we destroy feudalism, we destroy the agricultural stuff, we built factories, and history moves into a new stage altogether. But in Paris, they said, factories bring smoke, toxic waste and water, crime with people who are more dangerous, working people. Oh my God. Paris prohibited factories. Would they stop history? Why? How was Paris not only a fundamental theory contribution, which had to be a case to understand the laws of history, especially Marxist, but they led many people to try to probe into, how can we understand how these things work, and what was the driver of Paris in the 19th century as well as the 20th century? Consumption. It's what the Chinese right now. The Chinese are now moving. This is why I'm going from past to present to say these things are current right now. This is a revolution going on right now, most dramatically in the world, in China. The Chinese are really, and this is back and forth in the official Communist Party statements in the last 10 years. They dropped one. Well, I won't go into more detail, except simply to say the Chinese are both in the presidential and the Communist Party statements, as well as, most of all, the drivers among the citizens of China. They're driving around in cars. They're having, many people are university graduates. One of the main things that are written up outside as well as inside China, many university graduates are not taking jobs. They're unemployed. They're preferring to stay at home rather than work in a factory, rather than take a job which they could earn. Okay, so these issues are hot and difficult today. If Benjamin were an assistant professor, he was sending something to the American Journal Association, he would have to say, I have a new bit of theory, and I'm going to say that the laws of history are wrong, and I'm going to go way beyond Marx, and I've got something new, and I have a new term, a new critical thing for me, and it's called the flaneur, Flaneur, Français. Okay. Does Benjamin see that? No. He also had Marx inside his heart, inside his head, inside his feet. He thought about a Marxist. He also had, as some of you raised, mysticism. Read that. There's a terrific essay, as I'm saying, even in Wikipedia, read the subtlety of Benjamin's education, background changing, going to different cities, trying to think about getting different careers and so forth, going to Israel, going to thinking about France, etc., Moscow. The title of his unfinished books was The Arcade Project. His arcades were large glass coverings of entire cities. See, I think I still want to show you The Arcade Project. Oops, I didn't mean to show that one on the far left. Yeah, shh, don't tell anybody about the one on the left. We're not supposed to be talking about this. You may hear it, maybe in between the lines, but I'm telling you, he didn't mention it. Okay. Here's Benjamin. This is a little street around 1820. 1820, they were selling umbrellas. Parapluies, selling umbrellas. And people would go, a gentleman with a top hat and a beautiful lady who could well be an opera singer or a ballet dancer. And they would be looking at the window and they would say, which umbrella would fit best with your personality or your style? And then it would start to rain. And they'd start, and you'd say, oh, I can't shop anymore. I don't have enough clothes on. Please carry me away somewhere. And so what was the solution? Over here, look at the far right. It's called the arcade. See, Paris, I lived in Paris for 5+ years. From roughly October until May in Paris, it either rains or it's gray or it's dirty and it's cold, it's windy, and you can't go window shopping. So this was a solution in 1830s. So in the 1830s, the arcade converted that little street into, and at least turn your head a little bit, and you can see how the rainy umbrella, and you'd like to have an umbrella, but one umbrella for you alone doesn't do what the arcade does, which is to create society. That is, it creates the possibility to discuss. And so the flaneur not only wants to have a physical umbrella, and the flaneur discusses and interprets and thinks about and says, what is this part of your spirit or your feet or your shoulders, and the color, does that match your mood, and so forth. These kinds of things, and these ideas about the flaneur were actually not just Benjamin. Baudelaire is what they both went back to, and then back to Balzac. And they would talk about these things as the artist, and the artist was a source of creativity. Okay, so I won't say more, except to say that these things were critical pieces together, and it was not just the English word shopping. You go out, and so let me just read on. If I could hear, these were the flaneur were these. Through the inventions of this large glass, you could have bigger windows, and then soon they were updated in large scale by department stores. You have an entire building, so you wouldn't be in a little street anymore. Or later on, shopping malls. You drive your car, you have buildings all around, etc. And then today, online shopping, Amazon, things like that. Each brought fundamental measures implications of what was society. So shopping malls brought automobiles separating shoppers. Each step of the same individualization continually was weakening the critical part of the shared discussion about aesthetics. And not just about taste in clothes, but politics, lifestyle, and more. Okay. Maybe I can fill in more about the Frankfurt School, but why don't we talk a little bit?
Do folks understand? Because you went real fast over the issue of the flaneur, which is so important for many. Do folks know what that means? I think you have to define what the flaneur is.
Okay. There are a couple in that case. They talk to that is, in that sense, they're talking and reflecting let me give you one answer, or two answers as case studies. This is the way they teach stuff at Harvard. They case studies are in Chicago. We teach it. Give you the theory first. Okay, at Harvard they start with a case first. Okay, the case could be shopping for the parapluie. The Alex Ross anecdote for me, which was the most emotionally powerful, was to read not only interpretations of what did Wagner say to Rossini or what, etc., but Proust. I mean, Proust and Stendhal wrote about life in Paris and the subtleties and beauty of the aesthetics, even to the extent that Stendhal, I should say that for later. And to say that these aspects of aesthetics were so central that the articulation of these meant, in the case of 4 and 5 volumes, Proust, the great late 19th century novelist. And I've read more than one, I've heard several books about this. And several have said Proust didn't really have any understanding of music. He didn't contribute anything that was subtle or creative. He was just a writing, just a text, just wrote the text. Okay. Alex Ross, who's a music critic of New Yorker, who spent half his life or something like that writing this book, studying everything about Wagner. The book is called Wagnerisms. Shows the opposite. And he has a long section on Proust, that Proust was deeply influenced by Wagner. And he went to the performances, he went to, and then there are different characters represented within in the Proustian novels, where one character would take another character's position and they would argue through something which Wagner and Niezsche and Schopenhauer had been arguing about as well, and the kinds of things which you give a flavor of with John Levy Martin. These are big issues which they were all thinking and talking about, but in the case of Wagner and Proust, they gave it to you in a work of art, whereas in between you've got philosophy, and then you've got back there as well in China you've got economics. And all of these are working together. And so the consumption, okay, why some people, one question, what was the end of the Soviet Union? There's a big literature on this. The Russians themselves are fighting. There are at least 6 different interpretations. But one was, why did the Russians give up on the strong communist state under Gorbachev? Why did the Berlin Wall go down? I mean, the Russians, etc. Why did the Russians? And so one answer is one classic. That is the Chicago economics answer is preferences are complicated. People have individuals have very different sets of preferences, and only a decentralized market can try to respond to those subtleties in some ways that are not just having fixed, commodified, big production things where everybody dresses the same way, everybody has one kind of umbrella, it's black, no changes, etc., etc. Rather, you have these kinds of things. So in that sense, if that answer is socialism, since socialism, does socialism have to be commodified? That's what you heard questioning. Maybe we can, and so Durkheim as well. Durkheim wrote a book on socialism. Durkheim wanted to use the strong state. But then in some of these interesting entries is where and how can you use how can the strong, and each of these authors really thought about these issues a lot, and they in art, in philosophy, in economics, and so forth, and we're living them with them today. But I'm suggesting that these are not just dissonance, they're not just noise. Is it bowling and hot political science? Bowling alone. Bowling alone is this weakening democracy so much because we become so individualized that the only answer is a stronger Trump. Okay, so I won't try to get into the ideology. Elsewhere maybe, but not in this class, unless John wants to. Okay. So
but if I can, because I think there's still folks who, the key thing here, right, is that Benjamin is this doctrinaire Marxist who goes to the place where, as Terry said, I didn't even know this, that like production has been pushed out, and he's studying consumption. He's like one of the first to really think that maybe to understand capitalism, we have to understand consumption, and that is this aesthetic event where people are cultivating their senses, right? It's very, but he's struggling with it, but unwilling to give up that Marxism.
Yes. So how much was it within his head, which would be the sort of Semelian version, the subtle, or was he trying to frame it in Marxist terms because he wanted to, if he wanted to follow a narrow-minded, if you will, label of vocationalism, he would have changed his PhD thesis, and he would have gotten it, and Horkheimer and Adorno would have said fine. But if we had another quote, if we dig in there, Adorno, in their main book, Adorno and Horkheimer, that they wrote together, Adorno drew without citation on the unpublished non-thesis of Walter Benjamin. That is, Benjamin had these Frankfurt ideas before they did. Okay, and so in that sense, he was haunted. I mean, he was there 1940. He stayed in Paris until 1940. So you can see how, and he committed suicide finally. It was so horrible, right at the border. Horkheimer in New York got him a visa to get out from France and Spain, and then come to the U.S. He got a visa there. Okay, so the torments of this writing were not just the outside, but with someone like Horkheimer as giving him the visa, but also not telling him you better not try to defend this as a PhD here because it'll destroy yourself. And then they published those ideas. So I'm giving. Then John gave you the 2-sentence summary that I would have given you, but I'm giving you a mixture of. I'm deliberately, if you will, playing. We play different roles. Sometimes we shift with each other, and I'm complimenting John here. And he gave you my bottom line here. Perfect. That is, let me add one more footnote to that. The flaneur, that one word, or in the whatever, this short 15-page text which you can read, these had lots of other words that you won't know about what they mean. They'll have names of people, there'll be historic events, their places. All these things are in the book. That is, what he's done is distill this arcade project and then the 2 other volumes, and he tries to put a little bit in here. So these are not normal French history at all. This is what's in Benjamin's head and what is in his distilled writings in these books. Then they're in 10 or 15 pages, and it's complicated stuff mushed together. Yes.
Just to clarify, so Horkheimer and Adorno advised Benjamin not to defend his particular thesis topic, so he did.
Yes.
But then
And they
later,
did not. So he didn't get the doctorate.
But then he later did publish the material.
They published it, and they said Adorno and Horkheimer said, as if it were. And the words in the Wikipedia was they cribbed Benjamin's thesis. Okay. Overlapping.
I think Pierre has a kind of
Go ahead.
just something about the flaneur. Like when he's being a flaneur in like the arcades, when he's talking, is he only a consumer culture and that's the only way we can understand him, or is he by sort of chatting to his opera girlfriend or the other flaneurs? Is he also like a producer of some sort, or only like a reproducer?
The flaneur.
Yeah, the flaneur.
Not Benjamin.
Like in Benjamin's eyes, I guess.
I think it's deliberately meant to cover all of those. That is, the way that Balzac put it was we want to have it. So soon before, in 1789, they had a French Revolution. Before that, everything was nicely hierarchical. After that, you could be a novelist, and Balzac was the first who could support himself very royally by writing his books. There was a market. He sold, and so novels became big stuff. So then he said, being able to be an artist is almost a separate job. He then spoke out publicly. And he said, we ought to have more artists, and he had enough confidence in Paris where this kind of thing was discussed. In New York or Chicago, this would not have been discussed in 1830 or 1930. But in Paris it was, and Balzac said, we ought to have a neighborhood, and he was living in a place called Montmartre, and he said, we should have an arts neighborhood, and we could let anybody dress or not dress if they wanted to, with any kinds of combination of clothes, and their lifestyles should be anything that is not bourgeois. Bourgeois is in another square. So the bourgeois in that aesthetic, arrogant tone was not looking down in terms of money or class conflict, but was in terms of aesthetic sensitivity.
But I would also say that Benjamin emphasizes that the flaneur is a celebration of idleness, and in some ways a protest against labor and against the division of labor. So the flaneur walks incredibly slowly, looking at everything. Benjamin remarks that in 1839 it was considered very cool to go strolling with a tortoise. That gives you a sense of how slow they're moving. Like you take a tortoise with you, right? And Benjamin also connects this to the importance of what he calls here like Jugendstil, youth style, which is very popular at this time, and it's a way of valorizing bodies that are sterile. So, and you see this in Art Deco in America later in the 1920s. Women's bodies portrayed as if they could not give birth. They go like this, and And so Benjamin says this is the bourgeoisie's worshipping of sterility, trying to deal with its own, because he won't give up on the Marxism. He's like, this is it facing its own death and trying to make itself invulnerable to death by being outside the cycle of birth and death. But so again, it's a denial of productivity, of the cycle of circulation of capital and of production. So I think, you know, Benjamin he's looking at where production has been banished, as Terry said, but not claiming that it isn't anywhere else. It's just, that's not what he's looking at.
I mean, one huge theme in terms of social implications as well as individual within people's minds was, should I be a gay? And Proust himself was struggling, was he or could he or should he be gay? And one of his characters was doing exactly this and thinking about it and worrying about it. And this was fought out, if you will. These were just becoming an issue in the Jugendstil context of where and how gays might be acceptable, and in places like the Latin Quarter, that is, following up Balzac's neighborhood, became the Latin Quarter in the late 19th century, and the New York version was Greenwich Village. And so the Greenwich Village and the Latin Quarter attracted different folks who had different lifestyles, who could walk slowly, whereas in those years, even more recently, people had described Chicago as people walk twice as fast as anywhere else. It's the opposite of doing. Okay. So in that sense, looking for that is not just looking at the smoke, not just looking at the view, but feeling the aesthetics in your inside of yourself as you turn over big issues. Should I be gay? Or then people have written books, whatever, studies of gay, and they will say, what kinds of occupations do gays do? Waiter, chef, perhaps, music, ballet, antique dealers, where aesthetics are a prized part of the occupation, etc. So we had three hands. Go ahead.
I'm trying to parse out the difference for the Frankfurt School between ideology and aesthetics, or if there is one, or what that relationship is.
Maybe one answer is in the. Do we have it on the reading? For the Hollywood essay. That's on the reading. Okay. And that's the clear. That is, again. I'll start with a personal anecdote. I was a student of Adorno, and he said at one point, "You here felt the boot of Hitler. You know how bad it was."
That is, he's returned to Germany. He's talking.
Yeah, he's now back in Frankfurt, talking to Frankfurt students. Horkheimer and I went to America, where it was worse because they didn't know that they had to have cigarettes, small bathing suits for women, smoking bad stuff, driving cars. Okay, that anecdote led me to go to Berlin the next week, but I kept on reading and talking about this with others who were reading and looking at alternatives. But this essay on our reading list is a perfect illustration and answer to your question. That is, it's not as crude and simplistic as his anecdote between America and Germany is worse than Hitler, and the answer is, why and how was Hollywood was a characterization of the critical most, I would say critical in the sense of bad, in the sense of most powerful implication of the work that the workings that capitalism is at the heart of a capitalist society. And what is the answer? Is there one person or one aspect in that essay? Sam Warner. Warner himself. If he wants to have this, he puts it in his movies, and it's in Americans' heads. The capitalists command to you. Saskia Sassen will write books about the command posts and the command centers of late capitalism. Okay, so that's a version, if you will, of a highly personalistic way of making that general argument. It's the total opposite of what you get with the Chicago economics with Adam Smith. Adam Smith is, or the way that innocent John Levy Martin mentioned and said, that is, he didn't mention the word, but the term, the philosophical term is utilitarianism. So utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, this is the Scottish philosopher's philosophy was individualistically, atomistically built. And preferences are the driver, but the content of preferences is omitted. Neoclassical economics doesn't tell you what's in anybody's head. They just say people maximize their utility, but what's their utility? Whatever people want. But then you ask questions, or they publish about it, and what do they answer? It's called exogenous, or we leave it to other disciplines. Well, we're doing a little bit of more than any one of those. Okay.
Let me interpret, because I don't, because it was an awesome answer, but it was super compressed, right? So Adorno makes a distinction, as Terry's saying, like personalistically, he writes music. He'll talk about aesthetics. But Hollywood is different, and it doesn't matter that people think they like it. It's qualitatively different. They are the massive control, right? Not him and his friends. So, but that requires, as Terry's saying, like this personalistic judgment that says, that we don't care. Like, I will tell you what you should like. Your own likes are different from mine, and they just don't count. Yeah.
Let me give you a couple of points, which I was there are two Adornos. That's the crude and the simplistic. There's also the subtle, and I have to pull this out just for a second. It's in my knapsack to show you. I could barely carry him. Okay, this is a small selection of Adorno's work on music. University of Minnesota Press, and it has a clear, simple English language introduction to little sections of it. It's very well done. Okay, the Adorno did many things, and these were quiet there. That was one. He was a composer himself. Second, he was the author of a famous book called The Authoritarian Personality. Major work he did with people at Harvard Medical School. Personality tree, and that's used until today. Indexes, measures, questionnaires, how you capture personality, all kinds of things. Marty Lipset, etc. And people are they're trying to interpret Hitler and Donald Trump and so forth, talking about fascism using personality. These kinds of ideas are there and are active right now. We mentioned the dialectics of the Enlightenment and the eclipse of reason, philosophical, so I'll pass that on. There's not time to elaborate. Next, several other students and collaborators made important contributions that were fundamental and influential in their own general public and professional social scientists, such as Leo Lowenthal, went to Berkeley, who worked on analysis and content and texts linking them to mainstream American sociology, with Lipset, with Parsons, on changing American character. Herbert Marcuse at Columbia, where his son continued through the end of the 20th century. Eric Fromm elaborated more social psychological set of issues. The litigation I'll skip that one, and we'll talk more about Habermas. The Frankfurters attracted many students. Many German students would visit for a few months, just have the experience to see and sing with the leaders in persons, even if they were doing more academic work in other fields. People people becoming doctors, lawyers, accountants, they still want to see what's it like in Frankfurt. And then people who were student leaders from Berkeley, from Paris, would go to Frankfurt and get a feel for how they did it. Ironically, however, Adorno explicitly refused to engage in political action. He would never sign a petition. He would never say, you know, the Vietnam war is wrong, and we must bring our boys home. He never did that, even though the Berkeley students really, they wanted to end the war with Vietnam. What he and the Frankfurters had done was to introduce the term critical sociology or critical theory, which is widespread today, and there are seminars on this campus. Adorno's aesthetics stressed the importance of personal relations, such as attending a musical concert in person. He dismissed what they termed mechanical reproduction, including sound recordings, films. These linked with their similar dismissal of popular culture and politically engaged artists like Joan Baez and others who were very popular among students in person or recorded. The critical paper is on our syllabus is by Edward Shils, S-H-I-L-S, makes the big point that Adorno and Horkheimer are writing for a narrow, elitist audience about esoteric things. Shils says there's no reason to dismiss cultural aesthetics of maybe entertainment more generally to different kinds of groups, large and small, medium, fans of folk songs, of jazz, of sports, of TV talk shows. By a democratic society, it is blind-sightedly dogmatic to apply a single term to only one kind of culture or art, and to instead say Joan Baez is garbage, junk. Germans say Quatsch to multiple types of culture. So Shils is giving you if you will, a democratic conceptualization of culture, which is deeply opposed to the Frankfurt School. Okay. Those are my points. So there are lots of subtle things, but also some stupid and simple things.
Mike has
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a question about something that you said when you discussed the relationship and I think the continuity between Marxism and the Frankfurt School. So, and you said that one of the difference, of course, is that Frankfurt School put more emphasis on consumption instead of production. But also you said that the Frankfurt School
It uses both. I mean,
yeah, the Frankfurt School did not talk about proletariat, and from what I read, and especially from Shils, I had a kind of impression that, of course, they did not talk and they did not mention this particular word like Marx did, but at the same time, it is always obvious who are they talking about, and I think in Shils' description it's most obvious that they were also always thinking about this working class or common people, the people who were arguing for, when they were criticizing the mass culture and why it's bad, it was bad for the working class or common people. So these were those who were they're talking about. And yeah, basically my question is, do you think that at this point they were different? And yeah, I just wanna ask, what did you mean when you say that they did not mention proletariat?
in terms of the critical role of class conflict, and the proletariat drove capitalism to socialism and into the stage of communism. In that sense, it's absolutely central. So, on the other hand, well, so the that is Adorno, in contrast to so I would say Benjamin was more twisted. Adorno, at least in those writings about critical theory and arguing, and especially the students would tell him, get out there, and you should be there in the streets. You should protest. We should stop the war. We should, etc. He said, and he might have said, late capitalism has gone so far, we can't change it. Don't worry about it. Just criticize it. Show that it's immoral, it's bad, etc. But we can't change it. So in a sense, he wrote that more. Meaning, most of his ideas were not after that is. I'll just add a sentence. Mass higher education came to Europe in the 60s and exploded, so that the proportion of young people who and in China this has happened faster in similar manner. This kind of conflict with the age cohorts are hugely different, and this changed, and then similarly in France with Bourdieu. With Bourdieu, there was an explosion. I mean, I taught twice at the Sorbonne. Once with 6 people, and each one with they all talk like, I'm a little Jean-Paul Sartre. I can do that. And they had eloquent. Okay, and the second time I taught the same course, same building, same room, and the last 3 rows of people were reading the newspaper. They weren't paying attention. And then I'd talk to them and so forth. Mass culture had occurred.
So just to add on, right? So, but you said it yourself. The shift is from thinking in terms of class to mass, and that is a big shift. And that Horkheimer and Benjamin is fascinated by the idleness of the flaneur and consumption, but he still has a vision of class dynamics. Whereas Horkheimer and Adorno, they don't just reject the working class, they reject work. They think work is bad, they think production is bad. They don't like how Americans are always making more stuff. And so the center of evil goes from exploiting capitalists to producing workers because they don't like productivity.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd be quite so ready to try to defend that, but let's say if we take an intermediate, that is, look at the people who try to pursue that further is one way to say. I mean, how to continue that, and I'd say Benjamin earlier on, and then later on Benjamin was fascinated by Paris was doing this. Another in the picture we have, if we put a picture, I've got it here, but I can't bring it all here at once. When we have Adorno and Horkheimer, look at the Frankfurt schools right on your in the Wikipedia. Look up Wikipedia Frankfurt School. Look at the photograph. Yeah, exactly. Just hold that up, and the rest of you can do this on your own little machine. Take a look at those 3 people, and Horkheimer is looking like I can sell you this at a cheaper price if you want to. You can see that in his face. Yeah. Adorno is, I know the truth. I don't need to buy it. It's all in my head. In the background, there's someone else is looking down at his feet. He's pushing his hair. He's maybe scratching his head metaphorically. His name is Habermas, and he was the succeeding professor succeeding Adorno in Frankfurt. So I suggested to John we include a lot more Habermas, and he said no. But I've noticed
we had to cut a week. We did.
But as I said, in the book, in John's book, he's got a lot of Habermas. Okay.
We are out of time. I think we should. If you had questions that we didn't get to, let's just start off next time with those also.
Okay.
I just don't understand how you could narrowly escape Hitler and then say I'm not political and I'm not going to get behind political artists.
So I know it sounded really uncool when Terry was so mean about Horkheimer with money, he's Mr. Krebs, I'm sweating up money. That really is. So Horkheimer was like, don't rock the boat.
Yeah.
Don't criticize the Americans are in charge now. We're back in Frankfurt. The money's coming in. Horkheimer was always his vision of a school is you control the money, right? You make people use your ideas by choking off funds if they don't. And so after the war, it's like the Americans want to pretend everything is okay, and like we got anyone who's still here is no longer a Nazi. Like that's just what we do. And one of the reasons why Horkheimer didn't like Habermas is that Habermas believed all the stuff they'd been teaching is like, let's make the world better. And Horkheimer was like, shh,
Well,
you're gonna get the Americans
also
upset.
was like very like that
Okay.
he wasn't willing to get involved in politics, and it's like you just watched your colleagues like Benjamin
Yeah.
be slaughtered,
Yeah,
and then you turn around and are like, I'm gonna talk about society and culture, but
yeah,
to hell with
yeah,
fascism.
yeah.
I guess it's
Adorno
very
even,
different
I know,
from
look, so if you,
right?
if you
Scared from
just get up and
politics.
go, don't worry. But Adorno wrote one piece in the 30s where he basically used the fact that something was compatible with National Socialism as a point in its favor. Like he was very much an opportunist.
Yeah.
So yeah, slimy. He and Hannah Arendt were fighting for for control of Benjamin's papers, and Arendt was like that. She wouldn't even use Adorno's name. She'd be like that thing, like yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
And Arendt
It
was
is.
here. She was teaching here in the Committee on Social Thought. So that's part of the University of Chicago. And with Schills. Schills was in the same place. And in sociology. Okay.
Yeah, the thing about Paris and fantastic, yeah.